Imagine this exact moment. A dark spell drains the world. Every engine flatlines. The sky is empty of vapor trails, and giant steel machines suddenly turn into motionless, frozen scrap metal. No more trains, no more cars. You are standing in New York, and your loved ones are waiting in Washington, D.C., 250 miles away. A distance that yesterday took a brief nap on a high-speed train now abruptly morphs into your most visceral, waking nightmare. There is no magic left to save you now, just your bare feet and the unforgiving, brutal ground. If you abandon everything and walk without stopping, you face 15 agonizing days on the road, draining your last drop of energy. If you carry a survival backpack, that desperate journey becomes a grueling, month-long physical punishment. Welcome to the harsh reality of the invisible cage, a silent prison named 3 miles per hour, a biological trap that has chained humanity down for millions of relentless, grueling years across the earth. Millions of years ago, when the first hominids stood up on the sun-drenched African savanna, they did something profound. They simply walked. But at what terrifying, bloody cost? The sole engine of our ancient ancestors, whether rushing desperately for water in a parched, sun-baked wasteland or hiding from the terrifying, dark shadows of unseen predators, was just two fragile, trembling bundles of leg muscles. 20 miles a day was the absolute, crushing, biological limit. It is exactly like walking from the dense center of modern Manhattan all the endless way to the international airport, spending an entire day just to earn swollen, exhausted feet in total collapse. The great human migration out of the African continent sounds like a majestic epic in our history books, but was actually a slow, agonizing crawl spanning countless forgotten generations. A father falls to the earth, leaving a few dozen miles to his young one, and it took thousands of years and endless fallen figures to slowly crawl across a single continent. The very concept of true speed, of tearing through the wind, was entirely absent from their minds. We had to stop moving. We chose to settle down. But the true nightmare was just beginning. We stopped moving and started building, raising our dirt cities to touch the very clouds. But a bitter paradox was quietly waiting. The human civilization was ready to take flight, yet our fragile legs were still hopelessly chained to the heavy, sinking mud. The wheel was invented, a monumental spark of genius. But imagine pushing a massive wooden cart across unpaved, jagged rocks and treacherous earth. It felt much less like technological progress and far more like a cruel, unending physical punishment. Without smooth roads, without roaring engines, humanity was utterly impoverished in its mobility. We were forced to strap heavy yokes onto our own necks or beg for the stubborn, exhausted mercy of wandering beasts just to move a few inches. The legendary construction of the Great Pyramids, the ultimate pride of our species, is truly an epic tale heavily stained with the dark, heavy burden of relentless slowness. Massive stones dragged inch by inch through the breathless gasps of countless broken figures. We were suffocating beneath our own monumental creations. We desperately craved a miracle, a radical, explosive force capable of tearing apart this eternal, agonizing stagnation. And suddenly, from the deep dawn of time, a magnificent illusion flashed right before our eyes. In the profound, flickering darkness of Chauvet and Lascaux, our ancestors painted a deep, haunting obsession onto the cold stone walls. It was not just a desire for sustenance, it was the ultimate biological machine, the wild horse. Tens of thousands of years ago, they were not our gentle companions, nor were they submissive beasts of burden. They were the waking nightmare of our absolute physical inadequacy. Imagine standing as a primitive hunter on a high ridge, watching a massive herd of untamed horses galloping below, shaking the very earth, kicking up giant pillars of dust that block the sun. Over 40 miles per hour, a breathtaking, impossible velocity. Before your crude weapon could even leave your trembling hand, they had already vanished entirely behind the distant horizon. A biological machine so highly optimized, it discarded extra toes for a single, steel-hard hoof. Faced with that magnificent, terrifying speed, we felt entirely powerless and small. So, how do you capture a phantom when your legs are chained to the mud? Because we could not outrun this magnificent, untamed phantom, we made a dark choice. We weaponized our own weakness, turning our sheer biological frustration into a cold, calculated act of overwhelming force. At the towering limestone cliffs of Solutre in France, our ancestors laid a terrifying trap. Imagine a terrified herd driven by chaotic noise and roaring flames, pushed blindly toward the sudden, empty abyss of the rocky edge. Gravity did the terrible work that our weak legs could not. It is much like watching the total collapse of a modern market. Red lines plummeting downwards in a sudden, unstoppable wave of absolute panic. A majestic biological machine overcome by the sheer weight of primitive desperation. Hundreds of shadows tumbling into the deep valley below. Mountains of remains piled high in the cold earth. A silent monument to our complete inability to capture the magic of true speed. We destroyed the very power we deeply worshipped. We crushed their perfect frames just to earn a few meager provisions and heavy hides to survive the freezing winter nights. But this heavy, tragic victory brought us no closer to flying. Violence is never the path to true, lasting dominion. The greatest conquest in human history would not come from the sharp tip of a spear, nor from the crushing depths of a cliff. It would emerge from a quiet, bizarre act of patience on a freezing steppe. Around 5.5 millennia ago, on the desolate, freezing northern steppes of Kazakhstan, a tiny, unassuming settlement named Botai accomplished the absolutely impossible. When scientists dug deep into the frozen, unforgiving earth there, they stood entirely paralyzed. Countless equine bones were piled into small mounds, but the most mysterious, magical puzzle piece was hidden deep within the tiny cracks of shattered clay pottery. They discovered undeniable traces of sticky, ancient fat. It was the rich milk of wild mares, a majestic beast wired to panic instantly at the slightest unfamiliar scent, was now standing perfectly still, docile and calm, allowing a human hand to extract its milk. It is exactly like you carefully pouring a warm, comforting cup of morning milk coffee today, a simple daily ritual echoing the exact moment when the rigid spine of history was dramatically shifted. The people of Botai completely stopped chasing the phantom. Instead, they built wooden fences. They raised the young foals surrounded by the heavy, constant scent of human sweat and camp smoke. Over slow, deliberate generations, they meticulously reprogrammed the untamed instincts of the great beast, quietly transforming its deep, ancestral fear into a total, irreversible dependency. But merely drinking milk was not enough for us. We deeply, hungrily craved to fly. But the sky was never our domain, so we decided to fiercely tear across the earth instead. Around 5 millennia ago, between the Black and Caspian Seas, a powerful tribe emerged from the shadows. The Yamnaya. They laid their fallen to rest under massive black earthen mounds known as kurgans. When modern anatomists finally uncovered these ancient figures, a chilling truth was immediately exposed. Their hip joints were dramatically warped, spread wide in an unnatural, permanent physical distortion. It mirrors the exact aching spinal decay of a modern commuter, completely exhausted by an endless desk job. The lower spine heavily eroded, following a very specific, punishing trajectory of wear and tear over decades. These were not the brittle bones of simple wanderers or quiet farmers. These were the physical remains of the very first true centaurs to ever walk the planet. Humans who lived, struggled bravely, and eventually faded away entirely, on the strong backs of their beasts. This singular discovery shattered all previous assumptions. Humans had mounted horses millennia before the chariot was ever conceived. The Yamnaya riders swept across the vast plains, carrying their genetic legacy like an unstoppable storm. They were no longer walking heavily on the uneven ground. They were practically soaring above it. The grand physical fusion of human frame and beastly muscle seemed absolutely perfect. But hidden deep inside its biological code, the wild creature still remembered how to fear. While humans were fiercely reshaping the physical world, we were also secretly hacking the biological blueprint of the beast itself. An extensive genetic analysis revealed a massive shock around the year 2200 BC. A single, heavily modified lineage of horses suddenly exploded across the map, wiping out every other wild breed on the Eurasian continent. What exactly happened in the dark shadows of history? We successfully broke their genetic code. Humanity deliberately selected and bred individuals carrying a very specific, monumental mutation, the absolute suppression of the ancient, deeply ingrained fear instinct. We stripped away their hyper-vigilant survival mechanisms, erasing their deep panic, and forcefully implanted total submission, paired with an endless, unnatural physical endurance. If you are dreaming of towering, giant war horses charging bravely into the storm, the cold, archaeological truth will completely shatter your grand illusions today. The true biological machines of the ancient world were incredibly small, standing barely 4 feet and 7 inches tall. But this tiny frame was a perfect, calculated biological design. A smaller body requires far less fuel, transforming them into living, breathing super reactors, running relentlessly without fatigue across endless, grueling campaigns. The master code was finally cracked. The invisible 3 miles per hour cage was officially shattered into dust. Suddenly, the immense vastness of the ancient earth was grabbed, compressed, and violently crushed into the very palm of our trembling hand. Around 2000 BC, the chariot thundered into reality, rolling relentlessly at 20 miles per hour, a blistering, godlike velocity that completely defied our primitive, slow-moving biological design. The fundamental nature of human conflict shifted overnight. Slow-moving infantry figures on the ground were instantly reduced to completely helpless, static targets against the storm, swept away by the devastating, lightning-fast sweep of roaring chariots and the overwhelming weight of ancient cavalry. It is exactly like watching a modern pedestrian trying desperately to outrun a speeding locomotive on the tracks, a completely useless, terrifying struggle against a towering, metallic beast. Trade networks violently exploded, and grand empires eagerly stretched their grasping tentacles across thousands of endless, dusty miles. The great Persian royal roads witnessed exhausted messengers riding like furious phantoms, crossing distances that used to take multiple generations, now completely devoured in a single, breathless week of riding. Picture an unstoppable, roaring force departing rapidly from New York and completely overtaking Philadelphia before the morning sun could even cast its first golden light on the horizon. Space itself was suffocating. Ancient physical boundaries simply vanished into the rushing wind. But this terrifying, majestic, and absolute authority over the earth, sadly, was never meant for everyone. To own a horse in the ancient world was to possess the ultimate, exclusive luxury. It instantly drew a harsh, unforgiving line of class across the fragile fabric of humanity. The peasant remained trapped in the heavy mud, while the rulers and nobles literally elevated themselves, looking down from the strong backs of their beasts. Fast forward to today, watch an exhausted worker staring blankly as a sleek supercar hums past in the night. That exact same bitter divide still haunts us. But in this grand, tragic relationship, Who truly domesticated who? We arrogantly believed we bent their genetics to our supreme will, yet the horse completely restructured the physical shape of human civilization. We flattened enormous hills, laid down endless miles of stone, and built colossal cities solely to serve their running paths. Today, we still measure the raw output of our roaring steel engines in the phantom unit of horsepower. 5 millennia ago, across a freezing wooden fence, human and beast looked into each other's eyes. We took away their wildness, and in exchange they gave us the power to conquer the earth.